Hello and welcome to the MS for Mama podcast. I'm your host, Abby Halberstadt, happy wife, mama to 10, Bible-believing Christian, and I have such an encouraging and insightful and helpful podcast for you today from Jonathan Brush at Unbound Ministries. He is someone that works with teens, he calls them young adults, which they are, on a regular basis and has for years and years, and I find his perspective on young adults and raising kids so refreshing and so just bolstering and encouraging. And I think you guys will too. Okay, friends, I have a guest today that is in response to all the questions that I'm getting about parenting older kids. Jonathan Brush from Unbound Ministries is here to talk about, he doesn't use the word teenagers, he uses the word young adults, the phrase young adults, which I can totally get behind. And Jonathan, welcome to the podcast today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. And I appreciate the teenager adjustment there. It is fun to kind of think about them as young adults, I think, in my opinion. So,
yeah. And so kind of give us an intro to what it is that you do and why you're passionate about what you do.
So those things go together. I get the distinct privilege of working with young adults, often as they're making some of those big changes. I call it, going from sleeping on your couch to sleeping on their own couch. And I've spent sort of a scary amount of years now. I was actually in response to an email that you sent me going, I think it's been 27 years that I've been working in this kind of space. And so that's been a privilege. It's been an opportunity. And so I do get to train and help those students through Unbound. We say we train young adults to thrive. And that means we get this unique opportunity to walk beside people during a pivotal time in their life. And that is a privilege, it's an honor, and it's something I'm really passionate about because I think if you can get that right and give a little guidance there, dividends pay for the rest of their lives. And it's an exciting place to be.
Well, and I know young adults are looking for guidance, whether they will admit that they are or not. And they are thrilled when they find people that are showing enough interest in their success and their ability to thrive that they're willing to actually contribute time and effort and pay attention and listen to them. I feel like that those are the things that I've learned with my own teens and with being a high school teacher for 10 years, that kids kind of expect, young adults, teenagers expect to be brushed off. They expect to not be taken seriously. They've heard all of the jokes about them. They've seen all of the memes. They know they're expected to be kind of second-rate citizens. And I think that often ends up being what happens as a result. But you don't subscribe to any of those mindsets, do you?
No, I think there is something magical about the power of expectation. And I don't fully understand it. And I joke and say, if I ever stabilize all the other things I'm doing and write a book, I'm going to do that. Not because I know the answer, because I want to go find the answer. But I have found that when you have an expectation that young people act in whatever stereotype you want to push into them, you're going to get rewarded with that action. But
or punished.
Or punished, depending on how you put that, right? But my experience is, and look, I understand there's young people that are challenging and they have different backgrounds and all those kinds of things, but I don't say this lightly. I say this with working with hundreds, certainly thousands at this point, of young people in a variety of different backgrounds. When you come in with a high expectation, that's often rewarded. And I think as a Christian, I get a running start for that because I have to go with this expectation that these people are made in the image of God because they are. And when you start there, everything you do has eternal implications. And that really changes your attitude towards the way you deal with anybody. And that really bears a lot of fruit when it comes to dealing with young people.
Well, and it also changes the definition of success. I
Absolutely.
find very often when I am talking to people who don't know the Lord about success, about as far as they can go, and this makes sense. This absolutely makes sense. And I don't think there's anything wrong with this answer, especially from a secular perspective, where it's kind of like just, I'm the be all end all and this world is all there is. So YOLO. It's like, well, we're all just trying to raise like confident, competent, contributing humans, right? And I want to go, yes, that's part of the story, but there's more to it as a Christian parent, right? Can you expound on that?
Yeah, I have a good friend, Andy Andrews. He's an author, and if you haven't read his books, you should look them up. But he has this great quote, and he says, "Everybody thinks they're trying to raise great kids, and that they're already messed up because you're trying to raise great adults." And so it's good to sort of think about the end goal there. But here's what I find a lot: I find that even as Christians, we're swimming in these cultural waters, and we don't know that we're wet. And and those cultural waters say implicitly and sometimes explicitly, and even in the church, that we want to have successful young adults. We want to raise successful children. But the definition of success gets a little tricky, because when you press into that, it's almost always some definition of success is some form of fame, fortune, or power. Yeah. And let me just go on the record and say, I'm not opposed to anybody that I mentor, any of my own children having fame, fortune, or power. I am opposed if they think that that is the end game, because I'm certain that will leave them spiritually empty. But the other reason I'm opposed is that fame, fortune, and power are interesting because they're rare. They're anomalies. And when you tell young adults that success is some version of fame, fortune, and power, and that social media makes it look like that's easy for everybody, then the inevitable is going to happen. A couple years out of their final educational period, they're going to look around and go, I'm not rich, famous, or powerful. And now I have a grasp of what it's going to take. I'm not going to make it. And that optimism fades to cynicism. I think you lied to me. Then bitterness. I think you did it on purpose. And then despair. I don't care anymore. I'm checked out. And I think that there's a setup there that we do inadvertently, meaning the best, right? Like we want the best for them. And so I really challenge our team. I challenge my children. I challenge young adults we work with. Can I get you off of this idea of success? Because no matter how we say that, you're going to subconsciously bleed into that idea. And can we lead you to something else? Can we perhaps encourage you to thrive? And then we can redefine what that means to live a whole, meaningful, purposeful, useful life.
Yeah, because one of my favorite series to read to my kids is the Christian Heroes Then and Now series. I talk about it all the time. And the successful missionaries, meaning the ones that were successfully pouring themselves out like a drink offering on the altar of service to Jesus Christ, had none of the things that you're describing most of the time. They were depending on God for their daily bread, literally. They were not well known during their lifetimes most of the time, even though we're reading about them now 150 years later. And they were not considered powerful according to worldly standards. And yet these are the people that I want my kids to emulate because of their total dependence upon the Lord. And even in situations where no one would have thought they were thriving, they were at peace, and they were experiencing joy that didn't make any sense because of whose they were and on whom they were depending. Like that's mind-boggling. And it's not in lockstep at all with the worldly paradigm of it.
Well, and it's not just that. When we have this incredible advantage. I talk to young people and they don't want just a job. They want to make a difference in the world. Look, I think that's great. It's also worth noting that for most of human history, we didn't have to worry about our, purpose or mission or things like that. It was to stay alive, not die. Yeah. So there's a great blessing here, and it's worth pointing that out when people think there's all these hard things and stuff. And there's always, post Eden, it's always going to be hard. But to tell people like, look, there's an incredible opportunity. But if you recalibrate here at Unbound, we say we train young adults to thrive, and we pick thrive because it sounds positive, but nobody knows exactly what it means. So it gives us a chance to fill that spot. And we say, I think I can define this, not something we made up, but we look out there and we see people like the missionaries you're talking about. What does it mean to thrive? Well, I think it means to accept full responsibility for your life. That's what it means to become an adult. To prioritize relationships. Look, as Christians, our reality is defined by relationship, and the Trinity is relationship. And so, the fundamental building blocks of reality are based on relationship. I want my students and my young adults and my children to be excellent, but I want them to have realistic expectations for that. So we tell them, we want you to be extraordinary at the ordinary things. And look, if you're extraordinary at the ordinary things long enough, often the extraordinary becomes ordinary. But that's God's business. Your business is just to faithfully press into that. I want you to know how to create value. That's more important than knowing how to make money. They go hand in hand, but one's more important than the other. To live resiliently, which means you understand you live in a broken world, but you live in a hope that eclipses that. In light of eternity, that's your perspective. And for the glory of God, that's your purpose. And when you think through those things, it gives you a bit of a recalibration. And it's not so much that you now have a checklist, I do these things. It's more that you have a destination and a direction in mind that eclipses something as shallow and silly as fame, fortune, and power.
I mean, there's so much to unpack in everything you just said, because I know that because you've done this ministry for so long, you have to condense a lot of these concepts down into very pithy and very effective sound bites like you just did. But there's a lot of questions that get raised about the process of going from this, wet behind the ears kid to young adult to out in the world young adult, so no longer under your parents' roof and guidance as much. And hearing that list, a lot of parents are going to feel overwhelmed, and a lot of young adults would feel very overwhelmed. What do you feel like is kind of the starting off point for teaching a young adult how to take the first steps toward thriving according to your definition that you just gave?
Yeah, and I think that's a great observation. So we do kind of, maybe we can do this in three ways. The first is that I find young adults who are really concerned about my purpose, and they think that their purpose is related to career. So we say, look, are you Christian? Great. We can give you a shortcut here. Your purpose is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and your neighbors yourself. So great. Yeah. Now we have a grounding, and you can start that tomorrow and today. And so now you have a purpose. So that should give you a big kind of, now we can kind of breathe out, and we have a sense of relief, and we can say, hey, now we kind of have that squared away. The second is everything comes out of some core beliefs, right? And so let's start with this core belief. You were made in the image of God. You don't get to choose your identity. It's given to you. Good news, your identity has been given to you. You're made in the image of God. That's pretty high identity. It's as high as it gets, right? That has implications for you. So first, you can be secure in who you are. Secondly, you can think about, what does it mean to be made in the image of God? Well, at some level, that means to be a creator. So you can now start to go looking for the next steps. How do I create? How do I build? How do I move forward there? So now we've got a little bit of a couple baby steps. Secondly, or third, I guess in that, it would be, that means it gives you a blueprint for how you treat other people. You've never met anybody else who's not made in the image of God. So that gives you an immediate guidance to your relationships. It also broadens the scope here. Like this ordinary, normal life that you think you're having as a young adult, as a 16, 17-year-old, something like that, it has eternal implications right now because you've never met a mere mortal. You're talking to people that have these real significant depth to them. And so if we start there, I do want to say that, yeah, you can get down into all the weeds and you can do all these kinds of things. And people like me who work in different organizations, we try to build some frameworks so we can think about how we teach this stuff. But if you're just a parent, it's like, hey, take a deep breath. Can you tell your child, relax, you know what your purpose is? And the next step will be guided by who you're relating to and really being secure in who you are. And now wherever you're going, you're going to start from here. So this is not about like having to have a 20-year plan planned out. It's about do the next thing and do it with some faith and do it with some trepidation because this is a new, you're young. Everything's new right now. There's going to be some excitement, but do it with the security of knowing that if you do it according to your purpose, you're going to be moving in the right direction and God's going to unfold the path before you. And it should be exciting and interesting. And it shouldn't be something you have to stress out, be super fearful about.
Yes. And, we have from Proverbs that a man plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. It doesn't mean, it's not inherently saying that the man planning his way is the wrong thing to do.
It's that you can trust God to guide that plan. Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. As he puts that desire in your heart, as he puts that vision for something and then closes or opens doors to allow it to happen, you can trust that if you feel like your steps aren't going the right way, that you can ask him to recalibrate you. What I hear you saying is something that I often say, which is if you cannot tell what the will of God for you is in Christ Jesus, are you praying continually and giving thanks in all circumstances? Because the Bible actually says that is the will of God for you. And if you are complaining and fretting constantly, then you're not in the will of God. That part I can tell you. I don't know about your profession. I don't know about how many kids you should have, or whether you should homeschool, or who you should marry, or like whether your in-laws should move in with you or not. But if you're constantly complaining, and my kids and I are memorizing Philippians 2 right now, and it says, do all things. We memorized the second part of it in a different translation. Is throwing us for a complete loop. So the first one was do everything without complaining or arguing. The second one we're doing now in the ESV is do all things without grumbling or disputing. Same. Like if you find yourself in constant fret mode, you're not pursuing the purpose that God has for you, and you're not fulfilling the will of Christ.
Well, and it's worth leaning into why you'd be in constant fret mode. And often it's because you feel like you're being shorted. Like I'm not as rich, famous, or powerful as I thought I would be at this time. I'm not, there's some level of breaking the 10th commandment. I'm coveting something I don't have.
Yes.
It's breaking the first commandment. I'm putting something else in the place of God. Like those things are happening. And look, I think there's this defensive Christianity that says, oh, stop sinning and back up. Well, yeah, that's true. But I'm always interested in the practical implications that, yes, you want the defensive part. You ought to stop being covetousness and putting other things in the place of God. But then can you take a deep breath and go, this is fantastic news, right? Like you don't have to know everything. Yep. And you can trust for things to develop and work. And you don't have to trust by sitting there statically. You trust by moving forward. And so we teach our students, how do you figure out the next thing? You move. And they say, well, what if it's not the right thing? It's like, look, if you're not going against the moral will of God and you're not doing something eminently foolish, then whatever you're doing, if you're bathing it in prayer, one of two things is going to happen. You're exactly in the right spot and you're going to see the path unfold before you, or God's going to stop you and you're going to fail in some fashion. But then here's the piece that young adults have a really hard time grasping, because I think we've got this success saturated culture where everybody thinks nobody fails. I tell students, look, let's say you decided to go down this path and it didn't work out for you and you think you've wasted time. No, you follow a God who promises to redeem all things, and he'll start with that mistake. And I guarantee you, as you go back or you switch or you have to take a different path, the things you learned on that wrong path will end up giving you advantages and benefits and perspective and blessing and experience that will make the next path so much easier. God redeems those things. And I'm careful about stating solid truth. This is absolutely the way stuff it is. I'm pretty cautious about that. But that one, I'm pretty certain about. I see this happen, play out in my life, in the lives of my children, the lives of my students, the lives of my friends all the time, in the sense that God redeems those things. And so that should give you some confidence. Let's move. And if it's not the right thing, trust that God will guide you gently back to where you're supposed to go, and he'll redeem the things that you had, failed at along the detour. So
it makes me think of Joseph in a situation that he would have never have chosen. He clearly was already a leader. He was clearly someone who had great favor. He was on the path for being rich, famous, and influential in his own sphere. And because of covetousness and jealousy in his brothers, I just read this Thomas Sowell quote the other day that I'm going to absolutely butcher, but the essence of it is, envy used to be one of the 7 deadly sins, and now we have made it a virtue and called it social justice, essentially, right? Yeah. And that is the mindset that our current young adult culture is steeped in, that when you see someone else that has something that you don't have, your attitude should be one of that it's justice to demand that you end up with equal outcome, And not only does that not practically work out because you can't force an equal outcome, but spiritually, it weakens your resolve to do what actually is in front of you that the Lord is leading you to, which doesn't look as shiny and bright as that guy's stuff. And then you just don't fulfill what is in front of you well. And that's a sad outcome. But so we see Joseph forced into this situation. He didn't, cause any of this to happen, except for maybe with a little bit of 17-year-old hubris, of bragging about his dreams too much to his brothers. But their response wasn't reasonable. He didn't cause this. And yet, 13, 14 years later, when everything comes full circle and he is indeed in a place of incredible power and wealth and fame in a completely different culture, he is able to see what you intended for evil, God worked for good, because I never would have been here to save my people if you hadn't done what you did. So sometimes, even with situations that seem, it's less about did I do that right? But it's Lord, this is out of my control. I didn't know my dad was going to get cancer and die right when, I felt like I was starting to feel confident and I needed him beside me, or whatever hard circumstance comes along. The Lord can still have a purpose for that.
Well, think about, so Joseph has this really interesting, famous outcome, and other people in the Bible do as well. But I'm always intrigued by Peter, right? I mean, here's Peter. He's doing the best he can, and he misses it all the time. Get behind me, Satan. I'm walking on water. I'm not walking on water. I'm drowning. I don't understand.
Cutting off people's ears.
I'm messing up all these kind of things, and yet. 2 things in his life, he's the rock that God builds the church upon. And so he ends up with this great leadership position in the early church. And yet we know less about that. And we know more about all the goofy stuff he did And look how God redeems that. Like, we're still reading his trials and tribulations and going, oh, I could be Peter. I understand that. And so I just think about, like, what does Peter think? Like, after he cuts the guy's ear off and God puts it back on, Jesus puts it back on, and he's going, oh man, I really messed this up. Yes. And yet you're willing to do the best you could where you are. God redeems in a way that not only fixes the ear of the guy you damaged, but gives a direction and an example in a story that for more time than you can imagine, Peter, we're all going to learn from that. That's pretty humbling. And also kind of like, yeah, you can probably go ahead and try that job at the fast food restaurant. You can probably try to do this next thing and see what happens and learn from it. So
yes, I actually really think that, and I wanted to comment on that is one of the most freeing messages that parents and young adults can hear, is that you are not tied. I mean, I have a 15-year-old that's like, I kind of think I want to do this, and I kind of think I want to do this. And so my first and second have not chosen to go to college. My second will be graduating in a month, but he is not planning to go on to college. And if you'd asked me 20 years ago when I first started having children if they were going to college, the answer would have been absolutely yes. Like, this is what you do. This is how, even as a homeschooled myself, but college degreed person, I was like, I mean, this is just how they're going to be able to get jobs. And then we come to it, and I've got a firstborn that is pursuing computer programming like his dad, apprenticing under him in a much more kind of traditional, father passes the knowledge and the wisdom and the ability down to the son, and taking on projects from his dad, taking workload off his plate. It's been a blessing to both of them. It's been such an ideal situation, and love it. Will he be a programmer the rest of his life? I don't know, but he'll have that skill, and we're constantly telling him, you're not tied down to this for the rest of your life. This is just the place where the Lord has placed you now. And he was like, I could have gone to college for it, but I wanted to use my money differently. My second born has basically 3 options in front of him, which would have been college for like a kinesiology and like athletic training degree, or potentially mentoring under a position that came up for learning how to do like specialized mechanics and engines and things like that, which he has a real love for. And it was like, oh man, this guy lives 5 minutes from us. How do we not know this? It just came up at this time. Or potentially stepping into owning a business pretty soon, depending on all the factors that come into play. And he's leaning toward the third option prayerfully, and is willing to like start working immediately. I mean, just like build his business. And those are all potentially good options, but could be overwhelming if you feel paralyzed by which one is the moral good. I love that you're saying, if you're not doing something that morally goes against the stated will of God, take the next step and the Lord will direct you.
Well, I might even double down on that. And from my professional background, so I was the director of admissions for a private college for 11 years, got into non-traditional education, led me to where I am now with Unbound. And I can just, again, I find students and parents so paralyzed by this. I have to know what I'm going to do at 60 when I'm 18. Let me just state, that's insane. It probably always was insane. It's particularly insane now in a world of technology and AI and all those things. And that's okay. You're not going to know it, and you don't need to know it. It has never been, let's say you're like, I don't know if I should get a degree. Well, let's start by saying you should then not go into debt to get a degree. So let's say that's one thing that we can really say pretty solidly, and that would be a silly idea, right? That would put in the rank foolishness category. But you say, well, what if I need a degree later? There has never been a time in the history of the planet where it hasn't been easier to go back and to get a degree. If you spend 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 10 years out, and then all of a sudden you decide, I really need a degree in this, but then you know exactly what you want to get in and go back, there's going to be so many opportunities. There's going to be so many options and ways for you to do that. Besides the fact that I think there'll be less and less need for credentials, except for in some really rarefied areas. But, I have friends who went back and got a medical degree 5 years after they graduated from college. I have people that went back and got engineering degrees 10 years after they were in college. That you'd say, well, that's not the preferential way to do it. Well, it is if you know then that's what you want to do. And to my earlier point, and for them, getting those degrees was easier than younger people because they knew what they wanted. Like they were on the right path in terms of like they'd already decided and like, oh, now I know what I want to do. So I say that as kind of take a deep breath. And if you're not sure, take the next step that's in front of you and don't commit to something that's going to lock you in, especially it's going to cost you a lot of money.
Yeah, put you in debt. That's
Yeah,
a really, really big one.
that's the one that'll limit your options, you know. Yeah.
Yes, very true. And even then, the Lord can still use it for your good, work all things together for good, if for no other reason than it gives you a real passion for not being in debt for the rest of your life.
It'll keep you working hard.
Yeah, that's true. Let's hope. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you talk about this concept of knowledge and gaining knowledge and how there's been a paradigm shift from how we think about knowledge and how we get it. Even you say that it is more of a question-based approach rather than an answers-based approach. Can you talk about what you mean by that?
Yeah, this comes back to my, like, I'm nervous about people who say, like, everything's changed. I'm like, really? You know, are you just trying to sell a book? I'm not trying to sell a book here, but I think I can argue and make this argument and people go, oh, this makes sense. And so let me just step back a second and say, when I was growing up, which I don't think was that long ago, but my beard belies the fact that it might have been longer than I think. And so when I was growing up, and if I didn't know something, my parents didn't know it, and our extensive home library did have it reference to it, I had to drive into Culpeper, Virginia, which was 20 minutes from where I lived in our farm. And I had to go to the library and check out a book on it. And if the library didn't have the book, I had to do something called interlibrary loan, which, just to let you know, as a 16, 17-year-old, I was not going to do because it was way too complicated, right? So, and so then I had to read it about the information I needed in that book. And then I had to memorize it, or I had to write it down in a notebook, which I was also not going to do. And so all that to say is that gaining new information was easier than it was in the 1500s, but still laborious. And so from an economic standpoint, if you're thinking about jobs, well, knowledge is power. And the speed of information is an important thing. So if you hired a high school graduate, they had more stuff in their head than a non-graduate. College graduate had more stuff in his or her head than a high school graduate. Same for master's program, PhD. And so you could see the economic value of a degree just in terms of speed of information. That meant also that when you went to work, everything was slower, right? You would apprentice under the person you worked for. When I went to work at the college, you're supposed to do what the dean did for many years and then step into their position and climb the ladder as you learned everything they'd learned, because colleges were advertising students with direct mail marketing, which they've been doing for 75 years, right? Okay. That's not the way it works today, right? And so obviously you have access to the entirety of the world's knowledge in this little computer that you carry around, and now AI will sort it for you. Mm-hmm. And so that speed advantage is obliterated. Everybody literally has access to almost the entirety of the world's knowledge now. And so what was an answers-based paradigm, knowledge was in somebody's head, has now turned into a questions-based paradigm. Now hear me carefully. Knowledge and understanding is still useful, if nothing else, to find out the context and see if ChatGPT is lying to you, right?
Right.
And for critical thinking. And I'm not giving anybody a pass to say, take your 12-year-old and don't teach them anything anymore. I'm saying the exact opposite of that, actually. But when they get post-high school, understand they will enter a world where the ability to ask good questions and sort information is more powerful than the ability to just know the information in your head. And that requires a level of critical thinking and requires a level of asking questions that's important. Now, if you're a homeschool family, this makes sense. You already did know everything to teach your kids. And so you're already kind of working in this questions-based paradigm. And so that can be an advantage. But it doesn't matter what your educational background is. It's important to understand this change, because it does mean that the best thing you can do as a parent is to inspire in your child a level of curiosity followed by an ability to learn. Because when technology inevitably comes along and disrupts whatever's going on, the people that can say, okay, that's disrupted. How am I going to figure out how to fix this disruption and apply the information that I can now get instantly to my particular circumstance? Those are the people that end up becoming really valuable. And that's a matter of asking good questions and being able to learn things quickly and apply it to the problem that you have. And again, as a parent, I don't want this to stress you out. I want this to be something you can take a deep breath and go, how do you inspire your child to be curious? How do you inspire your child to ask good questions? And how do you inspire them to follow up the things that they're interested in and continue to learn more about them? If you're doing those things, which are pretty natural for most parents, you're actually doing the most powerful training available to you in terms of preparing them for the world they're actually going to live in.
Yeah. And that perspective shift can take a lot of stress off of parents' shoulders while still giving them direction, I think. So the next question, of course, is how do I teach my kid how to ask good questions and have good critical thinking skills? Any resources for us for that?
Yeah. So I would say that this is going to sound a little strange. The fastest way to teach kids how to ask good questions is to create a place for them to be bored.
Yep.
And so I know that this is going to step on some toes. I'm just going to go ahead and plunge into it anyhow. In other words, in a world of technology, in a world of AI, I'm telling you the best way to prepare your child for that world is to obliterate technology from their lives I don't know, 16, 17, 18. My kids had to all buy their own cell phones, and they had to do that after they drove because that's when they could get a job, right? So for most of them, it was 17 or 18 before they got their phones, which means that they had very limited access to technology before then. And I wanted deliberately to create a space for them to be bored. And when they said I was bored, I'd be like, so fix it yourself, right? And then they have to lean into I don't think here's the exciting thing. I don't think you have to have a PhD in teaching child curiosity. I don't think you have to have a certain book. I'd love to tell you that I'd sell you a course, but I don't think that would be honest, and I don't sell one because I don't think you need one. I think instead, what you need to know is that God created people in his image, and God is at definition, he's a lot of things, but he's definitely a creator. So therefore, all people made in his image want and have an inherent desire to create, which means they have a desire to learn and they have a desire to figure things out. And given an absence of any other stimuli, that's where people default to. And so as a parent, here's the exciting thing. You can do that. Now, you can inspire in other ways and provide access to tools and walk alongside them. And there's all kinds of cool parenting things you can do. But at heart, this is not about knowing some secret knowledge. This is about understanding the base reality in terms of who you were created to be.
Again, very freeing. And very much so providing a framework to work within with your own strengths and recognize your own weaknesses, as opposed to trying to copy paste. I think that is a lot of what I see hamstringing parents from taking like we were talking about, doing the next right thing, doing the next thing. You know what? Take right out of it. Because assuming that this is, again, not going against the morally declared laws of God, then do the next thing. If you've got a kid who wants a screen all the time because they don't know how to deal with their boredom, then the next thing would be to take the screen away. I'm happy to step on those toes, because if you've got a child who cannot create because they're so dependent upon receiving a constant feedback loop from a screen, then the first thing to do is to take away the feedback loop. Will there be withdrawals? Will there be responses? Will there be discomfort? Yes.
Will it be noise?
Yes. But they won't ever be able to, if there's that addiction factor, they won't be able to break themselves out of that on their own. And that is, one of our most basic roles as parents, is to be willing to do the uncomfortable thing to provide the best good for our children.
If I could, in most of these things, I'm very positive, and I say, you can do this and God can redeem. This is not outside of that. God can redeem. But also, parents, hear me clearly. The growing up years are critical for children. You don't have to get this perfect. You don't have to get everything right. Please don't hear that. But you can cause a lot of problems down the road if you remove that sense of curiosity because you've overstimulated through things like screens. And I think there's just so much evidence. If you haven't been paying attention, there's these lawsuits that have been won recently. But, we knew this instinctively. You now have all kinds of reams of data. Jonathan Haidt's written about this extensively and things like that. Yeah. If there's one thing I could tell you, if I told you, hey, one of the best things you can do as a parent is not have your kids get addicted to crack cocaine, you'd say, yeah, I'm not going to do that. Yeah. But if I told you this is almost more dangerous than cocaine, and especially when it comes to things like online pornography and gambling and stuff like that, it does the same kinds of things to your brain that cocaine does.
Yep.
That's the level of seriousness that I'd like to inspire in you. Like, would you have put up with your kids screaming bloody murder and hating you if you were taking them away from crack cocaine? Yes.
Right.
Okay. Just insert screens in here and do the same thing. And if you don't believe me, take 10 minutes, go to your AI of choice, type in Jonathan Haidt, see what he has to say about this, and be convinced. So,
yeah. I appreciate that you went there with that, because I completely agree with you. Talking about parenting, you think that there are 3 stages of parenting and that they're important to get in the right order. Tell us more about that.
Yeah. So if you work with young adults, one of the cool things is you get to stand on the sideline. And just to be clear, I get to stand on the sideline and go, whoa, there's some awesome parents out there. Like I work with some really phenomenal young adults. And so much of what I've been able to do in my life is like, oh, I'm going to take that. I'm going to steal that. I'm going to use that. And so that I've come from this, like learning some good things. This is almost from more of a positive thing than negative, but occasionally you see stuff and you go, oh, I'd really like to avoid that. I'd really like not to do that. Right. And so again, with this idea of thinking, I'm really resistant to people that give detailed plans because I think detailed advice is fun to give and generally useless to receive.
Yeah.
But principles or perspective, I think principles are things that are true no matter what. Perspective is a new way to look at that. So if I could say, hey, I think this is a way to look at some base reality stuff. So this is a perspective thing. So these 3 stages is, I'm not claiming it's gospel truth. I'm saying it's a perspective to look at something that I think is true no matter what. I think that what the stages you're aiming for is what I call benevolent dictatorship, which means I tell you what to do and you do it or there's a consequence. And if that sounds harsh, hang with me for a second. And when does that last? Well, it starts when they're born and it ends when you can't physically move them easily anymore. And so that's generally around 10 or 11 or something like that, right? Next is coaching, where I say, I can't play the game for you, but I can make you run laps. So there's still an element of discipline here, but there's an element of teaching. I need to instruct you how to do these things, but I still have some pressure that I can apply if necessary. Followed by mentorship, which is, I love you very much, and I'm available when you ask me for help, but I can't make you take it.
Right.
And so, coaching lasts until they're fully independent. And so I think that there's 3 stages of human development here. There's childhood, you're dependent on somebody else. There's young adulthood, you're starting to accept responsibility for your life. And you become an adult when you fully accept responsibility for your life. And that can be as early as 15, 16, 17 in some cases, right? And at that point, when you're fully responsible for yourself, you've moved into mentorship because by definition, you're responsible for yourself. You can be independent. The flip that I see most often is I see well-meaning parents who have probably been trained by an AI, who start as mentors. And you see this, mommy would really like you to put your shoes on. Daddy would like you to come over here now. Would you like to have this to eat or this to eat? Would you like to wear your red jacket or your yellow jacket? Right? Like you're trying to offer advice to a 2-year-old. And most people know that doesn't work. And most people do it anyhow because they think they're supposed to. But eventually they get frustrated. And when they get frustrated, they generally snap into dictator. So the kids now 9, 10, they're saying, you will do this and you will be here or you're going to be grounded for a week. And so now but you don't have that control at that point. 10, 11, 12-year-olds, you can make them run laps, but you can't make them do everything you say like you can a 2-year-old, right? And then you move into coaching. I really think that you should call the registrar and schedule your classes. Would you like me to call the registrar and schedule the classes for you? I really think you need to pay it. And I'm pressing out a little bit to illustrate the point. But boy, I have really witnessed this in many cases. And
I think that your perspective is really valuable, even if you are. I can see you're brushing broadly, and I'm listening, and I really listen. My audience is women, primarily mothers, niching it down even smaller, and younger mothers. I have a wide range of ages, but probably the preponderance of the percentage of the age is going to be 20 to 35, something like that. And they are being constantly inundated with the mentoring parent mindset and advice and paradigm. And we're women. And so we are more emotional creatures. We are more relational creatures. We are less cut and dried. So I actually really appreciate the broad strokes and the man's perspective, because one of the things that is causing a lot, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I'm just going to throw it in here. One of the things that is causing a lot of conflict in marriages and parenting is these extremely female-driven parenting paradigms that don't take into account the strengths and the cut and dried, grittier aspects of the father's influence and leadership, and then react in shock and horror when they hear words like dictatorship, which I know you don't actually mean in the sense of Attila the Hun or like that.
Right. We're not executing anybody. So
no, but the idea of being like, you're stepping strongly into your role of decision maker and leader for your very small children, because that is not what they are mentally or emotionally or developmentally equipped to do at that point. I think we need to be reminded of that. Yeah.
I'm always surprised, I get this reaction about I could never really, when I have raised 8. I'm in the process of raising 8 children. 4 have now become fully independent, and I've got 2 that are right on the edge. And then I've got 2 little ones that are really enormous, swell your heart blessings from God, and extremely challenging because of the background. And
are your last, how many of yours are adopted?
The last 2. So as I say, God gave us 6 kids to keep the last 2 alive. And so, and they're awesome. And I just want to, they're the peak of my life, right? So I can't say enough good things. But if I do not have the ability to say, stop, my 4-year-old will be dead by now.
Right.
And my 4-year-old, as a 2-year-old and 1-year-old, was not inclined to listen to that language.
Right.
And it required some dictator level corrections to get there. But I can tell you in the last 2 weeks, the training and the dictatorship level of pressure that created a freeze when I say stop has kept me from attending a 4-year-old's funeral at least 3 times in the last 14 days.
Yeah. When I was on your podcast, I don't know how long ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, you did tell me that. And I believed you that it was like, man, I am doing this so he stays alive because he has the self-preservational skills of a goldfish.
and all kinds of really exciting things with that, right? I mean, like there's, but so there's a level of like when you get down to like, hey, this is not about me exerting control. It's not about a male dominance thing. This is at base about a safety thing. Yeah. And then it's longer term. It's like when I establish that authority, here's what happens at school. The next thing, look, if you coach a sport, I coach a lot of ultimate frisbee. At some level, you have to have some built-in understanding of authority in order to make the kids run laps. Yeah. and some kids won't, and then they can't be on the team anymore. And so I want them to be on the team of life. I want them to be on our team of our family. And so I have to have established that authority where I say, I'm going to coach you, I'm going to teach you, I'm going to help you, but you're going to have to go out and play it. And occasionally I'm going to make you do laps and push-ups. And I don't mean this literally, I mean this figuratively, because I've got to apply some discipline. But in this case, I'm not physically doing that. I'm saying, I'm giving you a limitation. I'm giving you a consequence. I'm explaining why. And you're going to have to accept it. And you won't accept it because I can wrestle you into it. You're going to accept it because you trust my authority, which I established as a dictator. And then that kid says, well, you know what? Dad coached me pretty well. We lost some games. We won some games. I got the basics down, right? Then I want that relationship with my adult children. I have one who's, as we speak, is in Turkey. And, I have a son. He's been in Greece and Turkey. He's called me 4 times. I just think that's awesome. First of all, I think the technology is crazy. And he just called to say, hey, I just went to the 3rd church of Revelation. How exciting is that?
That's so cool.
Do you know how crazy rewarding it is to have a kid who cares about that and then calls to share it and then calls and says, Greece was fine. Turkey's terrifying. I don't speak the language. I don't understand anything. And I got thrown off the first bus we had because we didn't have the right money and all this kind of stuff. And at one hand, your heart's aching. And on the other, it's like, oh man, this is so cool that I get to hear this and provide maybe a little perspective. I've never been to Turkey, so I can't provide much. And if nothing else, just hang up the phone and be like, Lord, help me get the right money, find the right bus, to know what to pray for. And so, but you don't get that mentoring access unless you've coached well. You don't get the coaching access unless you've been a good dictator. And that's the bigger story. That's not about control or dominance or anything like that.
That is so well put. And I can definitely say with my own teenagers now, where I'm absolutely in the mentoring stage, that there's so much truth to it. If I had not established myself as the homeschool mom who spent the majority of her days with them, as the voice that I'll tell you, I think I've told this story on the podcast before, but my exact example of this is I had 5 children, 6 and under, I believe. And I was taking all of them to Chick-fil-A, which the Chick-fil-A drive-thru is madness always, right? And my second-born is being a second-born, and he is bebopping toward that line as I'm pulling. I had infant twins. I'm pulling 2 car seats out of the car. I have a car seat on one, a car seat on the other with a baby in each. I am like holding on with my free, giant air quotes, fingers to the back of my 2-year-old daughter's dress. The 6-year-old son, who's a typical firstborn and is like looking both ways 7 times, is fine. And the secondborn is about to get himself smushed. And because I've been a benevolent dictator for 6 years at this point and taught the ground rules and been very clear about expectations and follow through and repetition and training and all the stuff that you grow so weary of, I was able to say, Simon, Simon, Simon. Now, the first 3 times he literally didn't hear me. He was off in his own world, to where I finally had to scream at the top of my lungs, stop. And he heard my voice saying that word, and he froze right before a car hit him because she wasn't paying attention either. And it's those moments where you're so grateful that you have laid that groundwork, because otherwise your child would be dead. And just every nerve in your body is tingling.
And that perspective, and then, it's kind of madness when somebody says, "Oh, I could never discipline little Mary," or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, or they say, and I know we're in strange territory here. It's like, I could never spank my kid. Look, a pop in the diaper for a 1.5-year-old in exchange for Simon stopping before the car ran over him. That's a good trade. That's that little bit of attention grabbing that you think is going to be so hard. Doesn't look like it's much of a sacrifice versus a kid with a broken arm or worse because, they weren't able to stop or they didn't obey you when you said, don't go to that dangerous place. So.
Yeah. And the safety issues are paramount for us as parents of small children. But as you say, it becomes such an escalatory thing where you are looking, because as a parent of a teenager, I am very, very, very positive about teenagers. I love them. But I've had a lot of experiences with them that I didn't love. Mm-hmm. And I've had a lot of moments where you just want to put your head through a wall and go, what were you thinking? How was this what you thought was going to produce anything other than what it's produced, which was not.
And the answer was they didn't think.
Yeah, exactly. And yet, because you've laid that groundwork of the authority and then the coaching, showing them that every single time you are for them, you are loving them, you are, your goal is to fulfill that Hebrews 12, no discipline is pleasant at the time, but painful, but the Lord disciplines those whom he loves. And, those who are willing to be trained by that love and that discipline in tandem together are those who are able to reap the fruit of righteousness and the harvest. And you're like, okay, then I am planting and watering and hoeing out the weeds and being willing to invest early and stay in it, because I do want to see the harvest for my kids' sake and for my own, if I'm completely honest. We parents want to experience the joy of seeing the outcome be something that we've hoped and prayed for. And we're not guaranteed that. I always have to say that. I always have to say, the outcome ultimately and the harvest ultimately is that you obeyed God first and you did what he called you to do, regardless of what your child chooses to do. But so often when we're faithful to keep investing and to keep holding the line where we still have the authority to do so, our kids will recognize that we are doing it for their good and for the glory of God and because we love them.
Well, and just a word of encouragement, like if you're in that season of teenagers doing stuff that you want to put your head through a wall, and I've been there and I'm in that season. If you're chasing 2-year-olds and exhausted, not sleeping, I'm in that season. If you are trying to reason with a 12-year-old and going, there are logical fallacies here so you can drive a tractor trailer truck through, I've been in that season. Let me just give this incredible encouragement. Like I tell people all the time, I get so frustrated, Abby, when I would have kids and they'd be like, oh, just wait until they're, and then start whatever age it was, and then they'd tell me horror story. My wife would be pregnant and they give her the worst, delivery story ever and stuff like that. I'd be like, what is wrong with you? And so now when I see a young man or any man with a young child, I come and I say, oh, how old is he? And I say, look, and I put my hand on the arm and I say, hey, I just want you to know it gets so much better than this. Like, this is awesome. And it keeps getting better. And I will tell you now, I'm not, I'm surprised that I have 8 children. So I'm not saying how many children you should have. I'm not making any judgments there. I'm just saying, let me tell you, there is nothing in my life that fills my heart with as much joy is when I'm sitting around the table and there are 10 people there. It's a riot. The 2-year-old is being held by the 20-year-old. The 4-year-old's being held by the 23-year-old who just gave her the 3 things that she's not supposed to have because he does that because he's her brother and not her dad.
Yeah.
And the 2 boys are like we joke and say when Braden and Caleb are on the same page, the rest of us are losing because they just are unassailable, and the girls are all teamed up against them and we're laughing or sometimes we're solving a problem or we're talking about something. And I just go, does it get any better than this? Right? Like whatever sacrifice and sleep, whatever strange 12-year-old conversations I had, whatever frustrations I had with 16, 17, 18-year-olds, I don't remember any of it. It's obliterated, man. And it's gone. And as I anticipate and think, what does this look like if we got a bunch of grandkids sitting here and things like that? It eclipses whatever sacrifice was necessary to get there. And that's the message of hope and energy that I want to give you and say, I can stand partially on the other side of that and go, I forgot all the bad stuff that happened. The good stuff is what I see now. So
yeah, that's so good. That's how I'm feeling as well. Just, man, so grateful in those moments when we're all around the table. You're just like, pinch me. This is so incredible that I get to be a part of this, that I get to facilitate some of this, that some of that stuff that I put in 15, 16, 18, 10, 5 years ago is starting to bear fruit by the grace of God. Thank you, Lord. Just respond in gratitude. That's the thing. Okay, Jonathan, tell us a little bit about your resources, because I know that I have a lot of parents that are like, okay, this sounds great. I'd rather have some kind of practical how-tos. Yeah. Like, what do you got for me?
So our company's called Unbound. You can find out more about us at beunbound.us, which is beunbound.us. And we say we train young adults to thrive. You heard my definition for that earlier. Literally every product we have has to conform to producing those outcomes as well as we can do it. And when we say, well, how do you help young people thrive? Well, all our programs are designed to help them figure out what's next. And so there's all these options, all these things out there. And we say, look, I don't have a bubble chart that'll say, fill this out and you become a park ranger. Instead, I'll say, I can teach you how to ask the wise questions that will help you make good decisions in any stage of your life. And so we can help you figure out what's next. We can train you in the marketable, transferable skills that you'll need, whether you're going to be a welder or you're going to be an engineer. And those are things like time management, task management, leadership skills, conflict resolution, leadership, getting ideas from ideas to reality, all those relational skills, all those kinds of things. And we do it by delivering a community that literally will pay dividends for life in terms of a network. Think about going to a naval academy and having, that alumni base all around the world. It really is that kind of level of connection and deep relationship. And we do that through, one-off classes that you can take for 8 weeks that can help you figure out what's next. We call that Navigate. For homeschool students especially, we offer high school curriculum that interacts with whatever curriculum that you have. And if your young person says, I don't need another class, I promise that we don't promise to be entertaining, but we promise that we have to be engaging because we're the optional part of the curriculum, but we think we're the part of the curriculum that can make the rest of your curriculum make sense. And then our flagship program is called Ascend, and it is a complete post-high school option. It can be a gap year. It can be for students who are not sure what's next. It can be for students who say, I don't want a degree. And, if you take 3 years with us, we guarantee employment or refund all your tuition. And it can also help you earn credits up to 90 credits that can transfer into a college, and we can help you customize it to do whatever you want, either 1, 2, or 3 years. So that's the condensed version. But I tell you that just so you get a little bit of a sense and a flavor of what's available, and then we'd be delighted to give you the details and make sure it matches what you actually need.
Perfect. Well, we will put the link for that and any other information necessary in the show notes. But Jonathan, thank you for taking the time to come on and encourage parents. They need it. They're hungry for it. And it's encouraging to me to hear from someone who is pulling in the same direction with lots of young adults, a wide range of ages. That's such a unique place to be. I appreciate that you understand that. Anyway, thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you for having me. It was an honor and pleasure to be here. Your enthusiasm for parenting and sharing all the fun with it, as well as the hard, is infectious. And it was such a delight to have you on our podcast and to be here. So it was an honor. Thanks very much, Abby.
Yeah, thank you. If you enjoyed the MS for Mama podcast, I would be so honored if you would subscribe and follow along, maybe share with friends, or even leave a review. And if you want more content on motherhood and biblical responses to cultural issues, be sure to follow along on Instagram at m.is.for.mama.